You ready for this deal, Jimbo?
Live action, Cody.
Here we go.
Old stories like long lost friends, rodeos and late night bends, history before our time, round pens and pasture rides, cowboys of the Osage.
Howdy, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast, brought to you by the Ben Johnson Cowboy Museum, located right here in downtown Pawhuska, Oklahoma. Hey, it's old Cody over here, and as always, I have my main man with me, Mr. Songwriter, Mr. Rodeo Historian, Mr. Everything Historian, it seems like. He just knows way more than I'll ever know. Jimbo Snively. Morning, Jimbo. What do we have today?
Hey, Cody boy, it's just another great day in Osage, man. And Cody, we've got a couple of real special guests with us today. We've got Mr. Melvin Fields. And Melvin was a heck of a bronc rider, bull rider. He won Salinas, placed at Cheyenne like 11 times.
Wow.
He was also a barrel man, a bullfighter, just an all-around great cowboy with a lot of history. And we've also got John, our old friend John Dickson, with us. And John's been a bull rider and a steer roper, and he's a rodeo judge, just an all-around great Westerner, I guess you could call him. And he knows both of them know all the history of Coffeyville and Lenapah, that Lenapah rodeo, and the Buck Rutherford and all that stuff. And we're going to get into all that today. And fellas, welcome to the Cowboys of the Osage podcast.
Thank you for having us.
We're glad to have you.
Yep.
Melvin, where'd you grow up at, man?
Well, I grew up at, actually it was just north of Tyro, Kansas.
I know where that's at.
Yeah, and then my folks moved over east and a couple miles there, and then I grew up there, and then I graduated out of Coffeyville High School.
Yeah.
And then, well, I just about didn't graduate because I'd already started rodeoing, and I took off and went to some rodeos that lasted a year, and they let me out of school. Though.
That was more fun than going to school, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. Way more fun. And it's more profitable, too.
Did you always want to be a rough stock guy, or did you do some roping?
No, I did rope. Matter of fact, I win a second in a high school rodeo in Kansas, high school rodeo. I win a second in the calf roping. But I realized that I wasn't big enough to, if guys, big enough guys, and they started flanking calves and everything like that. Now, I wasn't no way I could do it. I had leg one down to get, and I wasn't really that good a roper. I mean, so I rode bareback horses, started out riding bareback horses, and then I went bull riding, and then I went to saddle bronc riding.
You were like Kansas all-around champion in high school, is that right?
High school, 56.
Wow.
Who were some of the other guys that were rodeoing with you in high school back then that we might have heard of today?
Benny Patterson, he was a calf roper.
Ben Patterson?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. National final steer roper.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, now that, I think you're talking about his boy. I think
Possibly.
Yeah.
Ben probably would have been.
More your age.
Yeah, Ben would have been your age.
Yeah. It would probably Ben.
Yeah, his boy Justin Patterson, he was Indian world champion team roper.
But anyhow, outside of that, of course, my cousin, he was up there, went to finals. Steve Buster and Larry Collins from there at home. He went from Coffeyville up there. And, of course, we went to the state finals. And back then, that was the first state finals that they had ever had in Kansas. And you didn't have to qualify or anything for it. You just had to just go and enter. And but I went, and they didn't have saddle bronc riding, but they had bull riding, bareback riding, bulldogging, and calf roping, and I'd entered all 4 events. And I was able to win the all around. I don't know whether that started me off or not, but I mean, I did go to the finals in that time that they had the finals in Reno, Nevada, and went to the finals, went out there at the finals, and they bucked me off my first bull, and I come back and I win a go-around, and on my second one, and if I'd rode my first one, I'd probably win the bull riding, but, you know. I was a little on the cocky side. I didn't think they could buck me off, but they showed me I could. They could, and matter of fact, Cotton Rosser, Andy Reagan had the stalk out there. Cotton Rosser was judging it, and Dick Pasco at that time, and I said it was a trip, but. We went out there, 3 of us went out there. We didn't have no money to speak of. I mean, it was, and that's for a credit card or anything like that. You had to have cash dough. And I think we got back to Kansas. I think I had $2 left, is all we had left.
That sound familiar, Cody?
Sounds about like every trip I left the house on, Jimbo. Hey, you know, I left a truck one time in South Haven, Kansas. I was moving to Oklahoma. This is crazy, Jimbo. I was moving to Oklahoma, and I traded for this old truck and a one-horse trailer. Actually, I borrowed a one-horse trailer. Moving to Oklahoma. The truck breaks down, made it all the way to South Haven, Kansas from Hutchinson, Kansas. And while I'm unloading my horse there on the interstate, I'm going to ride him up to this town and see if I can call somebody because I didn't have a cell phone or anything like that. And this guy pulls up behind me and said, "Son, can you use a little help?" I said, "Well, maybe." He said, "You want me to hook onto that trailer?" I said, "Maybe. Where do you live?" And he told me, and it was only about 30 miles from McAllister. And to this day, I still haven't seen that truck, Jimbo. He hooked right onto my trailer, and I just left it there. Last memory I have of Kansas.
Wow. Well, that ought to be on display somewhere.
Yeah.
It's probably still sitting there on the side of the interstate.
Yep. And mowing around it. So what did you do? Decide to go pro after that if you had all that success in high school?
Well, I joined the association in '58. I amateur worked with amateur rodeos. Matter of fact, Jimmy's Dickson, John's dad, I went to some rodeos with him. He hauled me. Him and his wife, they hauled me, and I went to some rodeos. And Jimmy was a good clown. He was an outstanding clown. And I don't know why Johnny didn't take it up, but I said it was born and it was bred into him. So
he did. He just don't wear makeup around, Melvin.
I did for a little bit. I helped Dad and fought bulls for a few years, and I won some money riding bulls, and Daddy'd give me about $15 performance, and I think I won 500 riding bulls one day. I thought, man, that's a lot easier than fighting.
Never another poor day.
And then now them bullfighters get $1,000 performance.
Yeah, well, I never did get that.
I think they get 500 just at a little rodeo.
I remember when we did Marvin Paul, he was talking about at those schools, he'd have to clown a little bit, and he said he didn't like it 'cause those bulls would get after him. And here he'd ride those bulls all day long, but he didn't want to be no clown, you know.
They're about like a Secret Service agent is the dangest thing I've ever seen.
Right.
They'll lay their life down for a bull rider.
Yeah. But clowns, you know, they're a godsend for bull riders because they do save some lives.
No doubt about it.
And that's and a ground. Nowadays they got them with actually the bullfighter. Back then we was rodeo clowns and bullfighters. We wasn't. But you know, now they got the bullfighters come in there, and they're good. And
you know, if I wasn't so scared of bulls, Jimbo, a foot around them, I would have definitely became a rodeo clown.
Right.
But getting in there a foot with the bulls just ruined the whole deal.
Yeah, you don't look like you built right to be dodging bulls.
Well, I can tell you a story about that. My dad, one time, we had the Scottish Highlander bulls he was practicing roping on, but they were real mean. And our arena at the house was, I don't know, 250 foot wide.
The one at Hutchinson?
Yeah.
Oh, it's big.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe 500 foot long. It's a big booger. It's about as big as the one here in town.
Sand that.
Yeah,
dude.
real deep sand right on the Arkansas River. My mom ran barrels at the same time we roped steers. That's how big the arena was. Well, he decided, well, if you want to be a rodeo clown bullfighter, we're going to get you started right now on these Scottish Highlander practice roping steer bull things we had. And I got out there in one of my mom's barrel racing barrels, and he turned the bull out and got him nice and mad. And that day, I decided I wasn't going to be a rodeo clown or a bullfighter anymore. Right after that,
Maybe that's what he was trying to do, discourage you.
I thought he was trying to help me out.
Smarten you up a little bit.
He said once they get too big to rope, we're supposed to eat them.
Right. That's my motto.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about a barrel. My first barrel job that I had is in McCook, Nebraska, and the stock producer had hauled a wooden barrel. It was, and it was dried out and everything. And the first performance, the bull hit it and caved the staves in on it. Went to caving in. Well, Junior Meeks was fighting bulls there, so he get out there and he said, "How you doing in there, kid?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you need to get this bull off from me," because he kind of got a straddle and Junior reach up, slap him, and and he's scorching me. But anyhow, that was when I finally got out of there. I rolled it back out there by the arena, and I didn't ever get back in that barrel. That was it. And I was there 2 years later, and the barrel was still laying out there by the fence.
Did you find a better barrel?
Yeah, I did. But it was a pickle barrel. And I couldn't get that brine out of it. And it was, oh man, I'd get out of there and everybody'd get plumb away from me when I'd get out of there because I smelled, I mean, I couldn't get away from that smell. But well, I come to Salinas, Kansas. Butler and Son had the stock there, and they told me, said, if you'll get you another barrel, said, we'll hire you all next year for all of our barrel jobs. And I did. And I worked Salinas and then worked Coffeyville. And then that winter, I had me a metal barrel made. And it was just luck and by gosh, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I just took them to sheet metal. They made it, and it fit me, though. I mean, that's what, I never was knocked out of it or anything about close. And I never wore no pad or anything, didn't have padding on the inside because I would fight bulls outside or inside both. So I never did have padding on mine inside of it. And
bull ever get his head stuck in your barrel? Huh? Has a bull ever got his head stuck in your barrel?
Yeah, and it got a little cramped down there when it gets in there. But
Can you get out the bottom side? That's
I'd go to the bottom of it. Yeah, I would. Yeah. I've even had to stick a horn in it, and pick the barrel up.
Holy moly!
And and sling it, and and I really I was working barrel, but then matter of fact, I got a chance to work with John Lindsay. And the bullfighter got crippled, and so they wanted to know if I'd fight bulls. Could fight bulls? I said, well, yeah, I'd fight bulls, I guess, And so I worked 3 rodeos with John that year. And it was probably the biggest mistake I ever made because we was at Sykeston, Missouri, and I'd worked it, and John come back and he told me, he said, I was fixing to hang it up this year, but he said, if you'll hook up with me next year, I'll go another year. And we'll team up together. Well, at that time, I thought I was still a pretty good bull rider, in saddle bronc, and I was more interested in riding bulls than I was fighting bulls. And I turned him down, but that was probably the biggest mistake I ever made. As far as rodeo, and of course I could have hooked up with John. I got in there and got all them big rodeos. John Lindsay was, I don't know, you probably didn't remember him, but he was a comedian. He was a comedian clown, bullfighter.
Explain the difference between barrel man and bullfighter.
Well, a barrel man just gets in the barrel, and a bullfighter is the one that's going to be outside, and he's the one that's going to be. He's going to be taking the hits for you, and plus he'll try to save the cowboy.
Right.
That's his job. Main job is to.
Did they ever get enough jams you had to get out of the barrel and save them or help?
Yeah, Yeah, there's been times too, somebody get hit. Of course, as soon as they got hit, Bob, I come out of the barrel, and it was, it's just one of those things that you just done. Well, talking about, and you got the picture of Johnny when he was. I wasn't clowning or anything. I was just at the rodeo. I hauled him, and he went with me and took him to Springdale,
Arkansas. When I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
Hold that
And,
up there.
and the mud was knee deep.
And it was muddy.
A big old bull, too.
Yeah.
And Johnny hung up to him, and I had just got off my bull, and he went to the backside of the arena, and I had my bull rope, picked up my bull rope, and I was coming back up when he come out, and he hung up to him, and I stowed my bull rope down and went up there trying to, but chaps and spurs and everything on trying to get in the mud too. I couldn't ever get to his hand to get his hand loose. It was, and the bull really wasn't. He was just trying to get away. He wasn't really hooking, but Jimmy was taking a pretty good lick, banging around on him. And finally he come up in front of the chute and somebody jumped off on him and pulled him loose.
Now somebody jumped off of the bucking chutes and tackled me and jerked me loose. I rode him for 8 seconds and got a score, and then I think I hung up for 30.
Yeah. Well, that was paid you more. You should have got more points for hanging with him that long.
You mentioned old Junior Meeks a while ago.
Yes.
What kind of fellow was he?
Junior was a good bullfighter. Matter of fact, he was one of the first bullfighters.
He's a famous bullfighter. He's one of the old famous guys.
Yeah, but he's jumping. He was jump bulls, and he had it in his contract that he would jump a bull every performance, which was a mistake because that's what he told me. He said, "Don't ever do that," because he said there's bulls you don't have the bull to jump, and that's what he broke his leg at Fort Worth because he tried to jump one, and.
Don't seem like he'd want to jump a high-headed one.
Well, that's it. He was a high-headed bull, and he went over him. But Junior was at that time, and that was before he was married, and then he got married later on, next year or so. But Junior, he was a good bullfighter, and he was a good man to work with, and I like working with Junior. And I had the pleasure of probably working with a lot of the good clowns at that time, Cajun Kid, Buck LeGrand. I worked a lot of rodeos with Buck. And it was, of course, Buck, and I'm not trying to knock Buck in no way, because Buck was a tough man.
Mm-hmm.
He could take a hit where most guys couldn't. They couldn't take it. And if one bull hit him, he just really seasoned you up mad, and he'd go right back at him, and that's the way
he took it personal.
It was personal with him, and it was. But like I say, I worked a lot of rodeos with Buck.
Joe said he saw Buck over at Veneta one time get hit. He said it would have just killed most people. Yeah. He said he got up and just made a fool out of that bull. Yeah. Just made it personal.
Yeah, it did. It made him mad.
Yeah, it made him mad.
If he got hit,
yeah,
he got mad. You know what I mean? It just seemed, but he'd really seasoned way he'd go again, and he may be hurting.
Yeah,
but he didn't show it.
Well, we did a podcast with Gary Parlay here a few months back, and he mentioned he'd worked with Buck, but he said Buddy Heaton's name come up, and Gary said, "Now when Buck LeGrand tells you somebody's tough and crazy, you better listen."
Yeah.
Remember Jake Williams? He said first rodeo him and Bob Wagner ever struck out on. They took off hitchhiking. First person who picked him up was Buddy Heaton. And the first time he stopped, they got out, never got back in. When Buddy got out of prison, he moved in with my family.
Oh, he did?
Yes, and lived with us for several years. He lived in the back bedroom in our house, and then he moved in with my grandparents for a while. But I learned a lot of good things about hanging out with Buddy. He was my babysitter there for a couple of years. And I learned a lot of stuff I probably shouldn't know these days. I was only about 10 or 12 years old, but he gave me an old barrel one time. I guess it might have been his old barrel, or he might have stole it from a friend of his. Who knows? But that thing weighed about 300 pounds. It was solid iron barrel.
Steel barrel. Yeah. And a lot of the barrels, a lot of it was heavy, and but it took a pretty good man. But some of them guys was barrel man. They wasn't little guys. They was bigger guys, and it took a big barrel to do it. But and of course, then that's when they come up with the walking barrel. They cut the square out of the bottom, and they could.
Yeah, this was the walking barrel, but you couldn't hardly walk with it. If you could pick it up, that was something. But walking with it and picking it up, because you couldn't move your feet, but about you couldn't take a step.
A little square hole.
Little bitty steps, But it had to. It was probably one of the first square bottom hole barrels there was actually that he came up with and brought back to me.
I wonder who the first clown to ever roll a barrel out in an arena and work in a barrel was. You ever heard?
I don't know who was. Jimmy Schumacher was. I think he was the first man to come up with a walking barrel. But he worked the barrel, and he was a good clown. But he was, and I said, as far as the first barrel, I don't remember. I don't know anybody said.
I think the first barrel might have been an inner tube. They just stood up out there and let it use. Like old Skipper Voss used to take an inner tube around with him. But I think that they used the inner tube for a distraction back then, possibly at first.
Yeah, my dad.
That's a total guess, though.
My dad used an inner tube for years in the 50s and 60s, and he was good with one. He could throw one in there and get a bull's attention and let a guy get away.
And a lot of times they'd have a dummy with a broom stuck up back behind him, and I think they'd take and throw that dummy at the bull or anything they had to do to get their attention. Back then, I think that they used a lot of inner tubes and stand-up dummies.
And
that's just a total guess, but I'm just going from growing up and watching a lot of these old school clowns, how they did it, when they're, because a few times I saw them using that inner tube without a barrel at all in the arena.
Yeah.
So
back in the old day.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore either, do you? Are there props out there? These guys are kind of
I don't
specialized athlete.
Come to think of it, I don't see an inner tube or a dummy standing out there ever.
Rumford has a dummy once in a while,
Does he?
but he's about the only one I see. He'll have a dummy. Can't think. He called Mitchell or something. He calls him.
Oh, okay.
But he has one of them bigger rodeos. But he's about the only one I ever see that has a dummy anymore.
Right.
Well, they may come up with a lot of rules and regulations that you can't do this and you can't do that, and they've changed. Now, I don't know whether there's a rule that you can't have a dummy out there or that. I don't know. Of course, there again, these guys as bullfighters now, they don't do no comedian, they don't do no clown acts, they don't do anything. They're bullfighters.
When I was a kid, they'd always have one bull that would fight a little bit, and they'd leave him out in the arena and put on a show with him.
At the very end.
Yeah. And now you just don't see that. Of course, they're up against time now on TV and everything, and to me, it's taking something away from it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they did, and every stock producer had a fighting bull.
Yeah.
They'd turn out generally the last one.
Yeah, at the end of the rodeo.
Yeah, at the end of the rodeo, and the clowns are expected to fight him.
Yeah, but even during the middle of the bull riding, if there was one wanted to fight a little bit, they'd mess with him a little bit.
They would.
Now they open that gate and get him out of there just quick as they can.
Yeah.
The best guy I ever saw, Jimbo, that at the end of a rodeo, they turn out a mean bull. Leon Coffey back in his prime. Holy moly.
Yeah.
He would dance, do the splits, everything, right in front of the bull.
Yeah.
And it was something to watch, really, to be honest with you.
Yeah. You talk about Buck LeGrand. He was a great bullfighter, but in his older age, he was just clowning, and these new bullfighters was coming along. He could not take it if they got a standing ovation. He would get out there and literally just let one hit him. So into the show, he got the standing ovation. Literally, he could not take it. Somebody else got a bigger applause than him. But he was just tough. He'd just do it. Because I remember Bobby McAfee talking about, he said, I hate to work with Buck because he's not going to let me steal the show.
Yeah.
He's going to get the last applause. And Bobby was one of them first guys that come out and was jumping bulls, and really one of the early ones that was just focusing on bullfighting.
Did you have any acts you hauled around?
Have what?
Did you have an act that you haul around or anything, Melvin?
I had some, but I stole them off the clowns. I never did really have one of my own.
Oh, I got you.
You had old John. You had old John.
Yeah, John, Red Mule. And matter of fact, Jimmy, I give him to Jimmy.
Yeah.
When I kind of quit and hung it up. Well, I give him to Jimmy, and I don't know. He went to.
I think Sheldon Manley ended up with him.
Well, I don't know whether yeah, he might have. I don't know exactly what. Of course, he passed away here this summer.
That mule, if he had a halter on, he'd buck Casey Tibbs off. If he put a bit in his mouth, he wouldn't buck nobody off. I had so much fun when I was in high school, have people come over. You can't ride this mule. And they'd all try him a little bit, and then I'd sleaze around there and slip a bridle on him and say, he's easy to ride. You could just ride him anywhere you wanted to. But if you put a halter on him, got on him bareback, he would buck you off now.
My dad, when he was a kid, he said Slim Pickens had an old horse. They called him Little John. That he'd come, started the rodeo, he'd come riding out on him. He'd buck him off on cue.
Yeah.
He said, I never did know what the cue was, but he was trained to buck.
He was trained to, yeah.
Yeah, and he'd buck him off for the fans.
Do you know Slim?
Yes, I did.
What can you tell us about old Slim Pickens?
Well, Slim, because of course I was in Slim's later years when I cracked out, was out there. But he was, matter of fact, the one I remember him at, he was working in Los Angeles. They had a rodeo in Los Angeles one day, and he was clowning it, and that's when I first met him. And but I said Slim was a good clown. I never seen him clown that much because he'd already started acting, and now my wife's dad lived with him, stayed with him out there in California, and he knowed him pretty well, But yeah, Slim was he was a nice enough fella. I just didn't never get acquainted with him that much because, young kid, I wasn't much to go talk to these guys, and everything. So you just had to wait until if they wanted to talk to you. And Slim always had something else going, And he was already acting then. He was already But he did work that one day rodeo at Los Angeles, and he clowned it.
Well, that's something no one's got to ever see again. Los Angeles has recently banned any rodeo from being held in its city limit.
Yeah.
What was it like to have a one-day rodeo out in Los Angeles? What do you remember about it?
Oh, it was a lot of, of course, they added a lot of money. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was the only rodeo at that time was $100 entry fees. And that was, this was back in early 60s. And went out there. I made it twice. Went out there, and of course they had only thing that kept them from having more cowboys than what they had was the entry fees. But they rodeoed all day long. I mean, it wasn't. And they had the afternoon performance or evening performance. I think the evening performance. That's when the accident guys were. But I never did make a performance rodeo. It was always up before, before the rodeo.
Slack.
Yeah, and slack, and you didn't draw too good. They didn't have a lot of the good bulls. They saved them for the night, and you didn't get on them.
You don't hear too much nowadays of them having slack and bull riding. Every now and then you'll hear something in the slack and the bull riding or saddle bronc or bareback, but you don't hardly hear of slack in the rough stock events anymore.
No,
not very often.
Well, it's they're getting so many performances now, but there may be 15 guys going out during the rodeo too in a performance. And that's the reason they don't want to slack in the.
No one pays to watch slack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that is nobody pays. And generally, it's real in the slack. They don't have the best stock in the slack. So if you draw up in the slack, there's a lot of guys will turn out. They won't even show up.
John, there's a lot of we take it for granted some of this terminology we use, and there's maybe some people that don't rodeo for a living. What is slack? Tell everyone what slack is, John.
When they have overabundance of cowboys, they'll designate a slack after a performance, or a lot of times it's on a morning before a performance. mostly it's timed event. They have too many to go during a performance. And used to, they'd have bull riding slack, but now they try to put them all during the performance. But it's just a designated day for the overflow of cowboys.
So all the extra people that don't get to go during the rodeo,
Yep.
because you got too many cowboys entered, the
Right.
rodeo would take too long to pull off.
Yep.
So all the extras, they go either before or after, or even a different day sometimes.
Right. A lot of times it'll be the day before. It might be evening, night, or morning. They'll have a full day of nothing but slack.
Yep.
And a lot of these today, it's really good for a lot of them cowboys because it gives them a chance to go to 2 in one day. Sometimes if they have an 8 o'clock slack, they can go there that morning, somewhere that afternoon, somewhere that night. They could possibly make 3 that day.
How do they determine who rides in the slack and who goes through the performance?
Well, when you enter, you can put your preference in. And sometimes it works and sometimes it don't. And then nowadays they got trades. You can always trade around. Them guys are on the phone constantly entering and trading, and when they're entering 4 or 5 a week, and try to make them all.
So a trade, Jimbo's, if you're up the same day at 2 different rodeos, some rodeos will allow you to trade with another cowboy for their slot, for your slot, so everyone can still make the rodeos.
Yeah.
My grandfather used to talk about at Cheyenne that he was always roping during the performance, and that's when, in the afternoon, that's when it's more likely to rain.
Right.
It'd make him mad, but he found out later that they were kind of picking the better hands to rope during the performance.
And they still do to this day, them rodeos. They want some of them committees will pay these world champions or big name guys to come to go on Saturday night.
Yeah.
They'll pay their entry fees or give them money to come because for the crowd.
Right.
But, a lot of times them guys would rather go of a morning or afterwards so they can make another one. Right. But yeah, they do. Still to this day, them big rodeos, they want them big name guys out during.
Most of the big rodeos now, that's the only people eligible to enter.
Right.
Top so many in the world.
Top 30 or 50 is.
It's not open to everybody.
And Cheyenne is a rodeo to this day. It's one rodeo. It never has taken trades. When you drawed up, you drawed up. You couldn't trade out. Cheyenne never allowed trades. And other big
one
rodeos
time they did.
They did one time?
If you're up in the short go at Salinas during the perfect at Cheyenne, you can trade.
You could trade, yep. I remember
they just changed that, though.
Yeah,
Not too well. It might have been 15 years ago, but
T. Woolman and Bobby Harris got traded because they made the short round at Salinas. I think that was one of the first times it ever done.
Yep.
And they traded them out because they was up conflicting.
Yep.
And they moved them back a couple performances so they could rope at Salinas.
Yep, the short round at Salinas is the only thing that trumps the Cheyenne trade right now, I think.
I think so.
Speaking of Salinas, was you telling me something about this fella here, Jimbo?
Won the bull ride in Salinas, 1969.
Yeah.
What was that like?
No, well, not yeah,
69.
69, yeah. And that was, I was working. I had quit rodeoing full time, but I'd always take off a couple of weeks, and I'd go out and I'd make Napa, Salt Lake, and Ogden. And it was that year I was able to work Salinas, and I was up. And I flew Don Huddleston. He's had a plane, and I was flying with him. And we went to Salinas, and then Salinas was up in the afternoon, and I was up at Ogden that night. And so everybody come back after the rodeo. He said, "Hey, are you gonna put a quarter in the pot and call back to see whether you made the finals or not?" And I said, "Nah, I rode my bull, but I don't think he's going good enough." But I'll find it. Well, I went in, and I made the finals the last hole. And I almost didn't go back and go, because it was going to cost me a plane trip back and then back to Salt Lake. And that was a double. But I went. I never was one to turn my bulls out. But I went back and I entered, and if I'd have known what I drawed on the phone, I probably wouldn't have went back and got on him, because California kid out there, Wilbur Plogger, was fighting bulls, both speed, but he drawed a hooking bull, and he asked me, he said, "Well, if I get in trouble, would you get that bull off from me?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll keep him off from you." And he went out there, and he just jumped, so he slung his head in the air and jumped, and the old kid bailed out. I mean, it bucked him off, and I found out I got this nickel son gun drawn, and if I get him rode, I'm going to be probably a smooth 60 points. That's what I'm going to be on him. But I went in there and I got on him. But I remembered the bull. They bought him off him, Kenny Brothers. And I had seen Manny back here, Buck, and he was a good bull. And I wouldn't let nobody get on him. I run him in there, made everybody stay away from him. I went down there and got my rope on him. And, of course, I was one of the first ones out. He come up and says, "Get ready." And I said, "You get on the gate, because when I get down there, I ain't going to be very long." And he jumped out there, and he was just whoppity, 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 and I win it. I mean, it was probably the best bull, good bulls I'd ever been on ride for a week. He was sweet to ride. I mean, he was just good. And I did win Salinas, and I got the Salinas buckle. And that's one of the premier buckles that they give out.
Yeah.
It's just right there behind Cheyenne and all of them. It's
Cheyenne,
one of the most
Cheyenne,
recognizable.
Calgary, Salinas, they're right there in the same.
It's one of the most recognizable trophy buckles there is.
And well, it's lucky that Melvin's with us today because it was that same year he was at Cheyenne, and George Paul asked him to get in his plane the night he got killed to go. Where was y'all going to go to?
We was working 5 rodeos. I'd stayed out. Cheyenne was over while I stayed over because I hadn't done any good, and I stayed over. I sent my wife and kids home, and we was working. Got on with George Paul, and we went to Sheridan. It was right after Cheyenne, and we made a performance there, and George Paul had got bucked off, and that was one of the first times, a few times he ever got bucked off. George Paul was a heck of a bull rider, and I guess he got mad or whatever it was. They said he got to drink, and I don't know because I went to the room, and but he got in his plane and was going to Las Vegas, and he didn't get over the mountains there at Salt Lake at Ogden.
By himself?
Yeah. Yeah, he was by himself.
Tell us a little bit about George Paul there, John, because
Well,
he's one of the most famous bull riders that a lot of people's never heard of.
I think he's one of the greatest bull riders ever got on bull. I might be mistaken, but I think his first year to the finals, he got bucked off of his first bull. He rode his next 9, and he rode 69 or 79. I believe it's 69 in a row for one ever throwed him off again. And then that was the summer he got killed.
That's just unheard of, you know.
It is.
And you know all the like the PBR and everything now, Jimbo, and all the big bull riders they have all over the world, really.
Yeah.
You know, one of the very first, biggest invitational bull ridings there ever was after George Paul died. They have it in Del Rio, Texas, to this day.
To this day.
The George Paul Memorial Bull Riding, and you know it's featured on that famous movie 8 Seconds about Lane Frost. It's the one. It's the one where he gets stepped on in his groin area, and old Tough Tillum is hanging on by a thread, you know, and he still gets on and wins the short round or something.
Not taking anything away from Donnie Gay or Sage Kimsey, but I think if George Paul hadn't have got killed, there would have been so many gold buckles in his name because you couldn't throw him off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really
He's
something.
real strong in the
Yeah.
arms and
Yeah.
stuff, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Wow.
He was incredibly, for a short-term guy, a lot of people don't remember him, but he's one of the greatest in my criteria that I ever thought got on a bull.
69 bulls in a row. Has it ever been touched since?
No, I don't think there's no way.
I don't think they can hardly ride 6 bulls in a row right now. I mean, it'd be tough.
Yeah.
It'd be tough.
You got to take in consideration too the type of bulls that's out there.
Yeah, the bulls were a little different back then.
A lot ranker bulls out there than there was.
Yeah.
Back when I was going, they had stock producer would have 2 or 3 probably good rank bulls, but outside of that, you didn't have.
They didn't have the breeding programs.
No,
They didn't put together the herds like they do now.
And
it was like the roping events.
Right.
You can. There's 1 or 2 steers they're the go-round steers, and then the rest you just got to get by somehow.
Yeah.
And it's probably about the way the bull riding was.
Yeah, you just hoped you got one of them good ones, 3 or 4, and then if it was 2-header, you sure enough was going to draw one. You just better ride him and hope your next one was better.
Well, Shorty Garden told me one time, like at Cheyenne, there used to be a bunch of 60-point bull rides.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Well, I went to go around to Cheyenne with 62 points. That was, they just did, but they didn't mark them. They didn't give out no points. Hey, and 62 points, and I said I went to go around.
You were going to Cheyenne in its golden era. What was it like there?
Oh, Cheyenne was a great rodeo. I mean, it was there's a lot of people, and it was And they started off with the bull riding and they ended the bull riding.
Yeah, I think they still do.
Yeah.
And they have 2 events. I mean, each they had 2 sections of bronc riding, 2 sections of bareback riding, and of course I think the roping events, I think they just down to 1. I don't know if they are now. I haven't.
Seems like they have several sections.
They've
of
changed
bulldogging.
it up, but the old tradition, Cheyenne, every event, you got 2 head in the long goes and a short round, and everybody just kind of went up there and camped out for the week because you didn't know if you was going to be up on a Saturday or Wednesday or Monday, Friday. It was a.
You know, everybody's griping about they don't let them camp out all week at Cheyenne anymore, but and I was a little down on it there at first when I heard, but it's the rigs.
Yeah.
They're too big. They
Yeah.
can't fit them all in. These rigs, you know, they're basically everyone's driving almost a huge semi trailer, truck and trailer around.
Yeah.
You know, they're having a 40-foot trailer with a semi pulling it literally, and there just isn't room.
The rodeo grounds is the same as they was in 1900.
Yeah.
You know, and they drove pickups and 2-horse trailers and cars and station wagons and 1-horse trailers, and now they got a 40-foot trailer and a semi pulling it.
When we first started going, I mean, you maybe had a camper on your truck.
Yeah, probably had
there
a
was
camp.
not living quarters trailers when
No,
I first started
no.
going.
Oh yeah, there was. I had a built-in camper that you could just barely stand up in it, and it wasn't an overhead camper or anything. And I lived in it. My wife and I lived in it. So you kid, if we had lid right behind, well, it took the window out, and that was one of the first second crawl throughs I think has ever. They come up where you go from the cab to the camper, and do it that way. And I built that. We built her on the truck. 1965, because I bought a brand new Chevy truck. And we built it, and then I said, I stayed in that at Cheyenne, that there camper. I mean, that's my wife and I. That's what we lived in.
Used to people would just pitch a tent up there too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I remember a story about Pake telling that when he was little, that Clark would rent an extra horse stall, and they would stay in the horse stall all week long.
Pate told us him and Reba's and Susie's first paying gig was at that old hotel in Cheyenne.
Yeah.
Ike Rude gave him $10 to sit there and play in the lobby.
Yeah.
So he said that was their first paying gig.
That old hotel's gone now, I think. Is that the one out on Broadway, or is that the one downtown?
Boy, howdy.
Downtown, I think.
The one downtown's still there, but the one out on right there off the interstate where they all used to hang out.
Oh, the hitching post.
Yeah, where Ricky and the Red Streaks, they've tore that place down.
Well, every good thing must come to an end. You know, all the times I went to Cheyenne, Jimbo, this is crazy. I'd drink a little beer. I'd go to bars. But I never made it to the bar in Cheyenne because it's such a long day there. I'd be asleep before it got dark.
So you never got to see Ricky and the Red Streaks.
Never got to see Ricky and the Red Streaks in Cheyenne.
That was
That's a big downturn in my whole life right there. Who knows what would have happened, Jimbo, if I got to see Ricky and the Red Streaks.
Might not turned out so good.
You know where we used to stay there? The Little America.
yeah, across the interstate.
Oh, yeah, that was always a fun place when I was a kid. We wouldn't stay there the whole time, maybe one or 2 nights because it's kind of pricey motel. But we met they were filming an episode of the Dukes of Hazzards there one year during the rodeo. And old Uncle Jesse, he was staying in the room right by us. That's the best memory I got at Little America. Oh, yeah. Jim Davis left me and Bryce there one time. We were little old kids. He said, oh, if you boys need anything, just go charge it up there at the restaurant and stuff. Okay. Yeah, we charged about $300-400 worth of food and ice cream to them. We're buying all the other kids. Oh, you wanted ice cream? Come on. We'll put it on Jim's tab. I swear.
Yeah, that was, of course, one year I was out there, we stayed in a motel, and I can't remember what motel it was, but it's where about all the cowboys stayed, and they was all there. I said, we stayed, and then right across the street was a restaurant, a Chinaman's restaurant, and he's Chinese man, and but he fed the cowboys. I mean, it was, man, you go in there, and he would make sure you definitely got enough to eat. And I said, I think that's the only time that I ever stayed at a motel when I was at Cheyenne. Yeah. And I don't know why I did it that year. Maybe I'd hit a lick before. I don't know. I had win a little money, so I, all it was.
A lot of people rent out their house, extra rooms and stuff.
Yeah, oh,
and
yeah.
Basements. I remember staying in a basement up there one
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
When my last couple of years of rodeo, and we really reverted back to the old ways. I got in with Ralph Williams, and we were going in a camper on the back of his truck and a 2-horse inline trailer behind it. In the 2000s, we were rodeoing like we were in the 1970s or 60s, but that's still the way Ralph goes today.
Oh, yeah. Him and Sally, that's the way they go.
Yep.
What about the old Lenapah rodeo, Melvin?
Well, to me, it was a good rodeo. I made the first rodeo they had. There was Butler and Son had it, and I worked it. And at one time when they first started out, the all-around was give to whoever won the most money. Well, your roping events you couldn't compete. Riding events couldn't compete. Well, then Shote, of course, he was the one that kind of headed up Shote Webster. And later on, I don't even remember what year it was, but I know I win 2 saddles, 68 and 69, all-around saddles there. And but like I said, they split it up. The timed events, people have are all around, and the riding events had a all-around deal.
The first few years they had it, well, they always give 2 saddles away, champion steer roper and all-around. First few years they had it, whoever won the steer roper won the all-around saddle. So 4 or 5 years into it, they said, we got to do something different. So they made it, you had to be in a rough stock to win the all-around. That's when Melvin come in criteria and won it 2 times. And then, because back then they'd have more steer ropers in any event they had. And if you won a steer roper and was entered in something else, you won the all-around too.
I bet they had a big cow cutter for that steer roping too.
Oh,
didn't they?
yeah, yeah.
Well, I say with Shote there, of course, Shote he'd been roping, and he was one. I don't know whether he actually but he ramrodded it.
Oh, yeah, he was the arena director from the time it started till it quit.
Yeah, and
Was it always a night performance?
No, they always had the afternoon on. The 4th of July was always afternoon.
Okay, because I saw some old film on Facebook here a while back, and I never was over there during the day.
It was the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and the 4th of July was always on an afternoon, but the rest of them was in the nighttime.
Okay.
yeah, because when they first started, I know there's a lot of them that would make Butler and Son. They had Lenapah and they had Hinton, Oklahoma.
Hinton, Oklahoma.
And they would make Hinton of a nighttime and make Lenapah
in the afternoon.
And we flew, most of us, I was clowning and both rodeos. So, we had a plane that come in where it was just south of where the arena was at. The plane landed out there, and we went out there and got on a plane and flew to Hinton.
Lenapah was probably the first and only rodeo arena that had a drive-in theater.
Yeah.
Yep.
They had ramps built. You could park your cars 1 layer, 2 layers there, and had big loudspeakers up there. And I'm telling you, man, the arena is almost identical to Paul Huskis. Rope and shoots, you run them south to north, and the buck and shoots were on the east, almost the same size. They would be more people there than you could imagine back in the 60s. Come out of, I don't know where they come from, everywhere.
Yeah, because that's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, middle of nowhere, yeah. I remember as a kid there, one time there, Shote's wife picked up, them guys were trying to work Pecos and Lenapah. And she went to the airport and picked up Dean Oliver, Don McLaughlin, Jim Bob Altizer, and Troy Fort. And Shote was going to mount them all. And, Shote had all kinds of horses. And that day, Lon Chaney comes off the hill leading 6, 8 horses, him and Ben Patterson. I'll never forget when they pulled up and they all jumped out of that car, Dean Oliver run over to Lon Chaney and said, please put me on one, it won't buck me off. And at the time, old Deck was there, and that's the horse that Shote had that Glenn Franklin won 2 world titles on. Well, McLaughlin was kind of up there pretty high, so they let him ride Deck, and he jerked one down and get him up. And they let Dean Oliver ride old Pidge, was an old, Jim, you probably remember him. He was a lorry horse. They tripped steers and roped kids on him both.
Yeah.
I don't remember what happened, but I know right before the rodeo, they was sorting calves. And you remember they always put the cows at the back and the calves at the front. and these little crossbred Bramer calves weigh 350 and run by and jumping and kicking. I kicked somebody in the back, knocked them down. And Dean Oliver said, "Shote, where'd you get them calves at? From the zoo?"
Yeah, I bet Shote, I don't know about the rough stock, but I bet he made sure the time event stuff was pretty good stock.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, Uncle, but Shote was kind of a rough character anyhow. And a horse buck or something like that, it didn't bother him a bit.
No.
And he'd like to see some action.
Yeah.
And he was an action man. I mean, he liked it.
Yeah.
And
Were you around Buck Rutherford much?
yes, matter of fact, when I first got my card, I traveled with Buck. And
Bet he taught you a lot, didn't he?
oh yeah, and he did talk me a lot. As Buck was, we would leave. He'd say, "Well, come down the day before to whatever," and he said, "We're going to leave." Well, we wouldn't get there till the day of the rodeo because we'd stop in every bar between wherever you was going. You had to stop in every bar. And
Did everybody know him in every bar?
yeah. He was, and finally, but the Buck he was kind of a con man. I mean, he got, for me, first couple rodeos I went to, the time I got to rodeo, I was broke. Because Buck would order a drink, and then he'd sit there and watch that waitress. And when she started back with a drink, he'd get up and go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And so, well, you'd pay for it, Finally, I kind of caught on to it, and Buck done that, and the waitress come back down there and said, "Wanted a beer?" He said, "Well, what? You didn't pay for it?" I said, "No, you ordered it, you pay for it." And that was that's the way you had to handle him. It was, and then going down the road, Buck was of course he was hard as that table right there. Buck never was. There wasn't no soft spot on him.
Right.
And he'd go on down the road and he'd come back out and he's knocked the air all out of me. I mean, he's hit me in the chest and knocked all the air out of me. And finally, we was at St. Louis, and we went to, there's a bowling alley right outside of the arena there at St. Louis, and in between performances, we'd go out over at that bowling alley, and of course, we'd drink beer and everything. Sometimes we'd bowl. Well, Buck and I, we was bowling. Buck didn't, he was too tight, he wouldn't buy no shoes. He took his boots off, but he wouldn't buy no shoes. And he reared back and he's going to hit me, and I caught him and I kicked him on the shin. His feet went out from under me. His head hit the ground. By the time the ball hit the ground on the floor, go thump. But he said, "What'd you do that for?" I said, "'Cause you was going to hit me." And I said, "I ain't going. I can't hit you and hurt you, but I can dang sure kick you." And so that kind of, I broke him with that beating on me, because he knock all the air out of me. And I've tried to hit him I'd come from the floor up and I couldn't blink his eyes. He was tough.
Did you know him, John?
Yeah, very well. I growed up between him and Shote, lived about 3 or 4 miles from Shote and about 6 or 7 from Buck. And Buck was one of the early time true all-around cowboys. He worked both ends of the arena. He could ride bareback horses and bulls and bulldog as good as any of them going down the road, ride saddle broncs. And like he said, the whiskey and the women probably cost him winning a lot more gold buckles. But in 1954, he
Can't
won.
put a price on a good time, can you?
No. In 1954, he won $44,000, just shy of $45,000. And the last year, Trevor Brazil won the all-around, whatever year it was, 16, 17. You have to help me on that. They comprised the money, and Trevor won $480, and it would have been equal to what Buck won in 54.
Yeah.
That's how ahead of time he was.
Yeah.
But the car wrecks and the women, he was just tough, like Melvin said, tough as
He
iron.
was the first $40,000 cowboy, and it was several years after that before anybody matched it
I
again.
think it was Larry Mahan in like 65 or
Might have
66.
been. I mean, it was
before
years, before anybody won 40 again.
Yeah, I think the next year Jim Shoulders won all around, won 20,000 or maybe barely 20,000.
Yeah. Right.
I heard he'd ride with a broken leg or anything.
Oh yeah. He'd get on sometimes with no glove in the bull riding because he couldn't find it or forgot it or didn't know where it was at. I mean, that's true grit right there.
Yeah, he was and he could ride bulls either hand.
Yeah,
It
left
didn't
or
make
right.
no difference. Right or left. It didn't make no difference.
Yeah. How big was he?
He maybe wasn't 6 foot tall, or if it, that 5'10" maybe, but he was real stout built.
In the upper body, I mean, he was.
Had big hands always.
Big
Oh, yeah,
hands,
big
and he was
hands.
built like a V.
Yeah.
Waist there, and then he just got out like that, and then real thick. His chest was that thick.
Yeah.
He was an animal. He had a brother that was a Golden Glove boxer, and Buck boxed a little bit, but he didn't really like fighting, but he was tough. And his brother Earl was real tough. I mean, he was, but that Buck, I don't know if he worked out or just probably worked out lifting that bottle, I guess.
But this guy, it's that country strong, you know?
Yeah.
He's a funny story. When I was a kid, he'd come down at Lenapah, like Melvin said, them bars and stuff. My dad and them, they had a filling station there, and there's a bar across the street. And he'd size everybody out in there, and if he seen you had a pack of cigarettes, he'd walk over and put his hand around and say, "Hey, pard, let's have a smoke." He'd have a full pack in his pocket.
I used to know people that did that with Copenhagen.
Yeah, he was a con man. I mean, he could, and he'd get them guys that haul them guys down there, cowboys down there to stay at his place. Put them up, then he'd take off and go to a couple of rodeos and leave them there.
Yeah.
And it was.
And the funny story about that, he'd leave them there, and at the time, he was Mr. Wrangler, one of them.
Yeah.
And I remember going in there when I was junior high in high school, and they was Wrangler jeans and Wrangler shirts from the floor to the ceiling in that one closet. They'd send them to him. Well, if any of them guys was close to his size, his mom would give him them jeans and shirts. Well, Buck would find out about it, and they'd have to haul hay for 2 days to pay for them jeans and shirts. And he got them given to him and was never going to wear all of them.
Yeah, that's. But that was, of course, with me. I didn't live that far from him, so he tried that with me. Come down ahead of time, come down the day before we'll go, and then he'd say, "Well, I got to go to town. Why don't you help my dad do this?" And then he'd go off, but I had my car. I never did was a foot down there. I had my car, so I got ready to go home. Well, I'd just go home, and but he didn't work with me. But I know a bunch of them cowboys that did. He hauled them down there, and he'd go off and leave, and go enter a rodeo and go off and eat. And it may be 2 weeks, and they'd be down there. Of course, they couldn't go nowhere.
Yeah.
That's it. They'd have to help his dad. And
Well, it's a shame he didn't reach his full potential and see what he could have been, but
yeah.
wouldn't have been as many good stories.
Yeah. Buck was. I mean, at one time, he was tough, but then the bottle got to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, bottle in the car wrecks.
Yeah. Yeah, they told him he was going to have to quit after that one car wreck. He had plates in his head and stuff.
And
didn't slow him down.
Yeah, he come back after some of that stuff there. You'd have to look it up. 54s went all around. Then he had that bad car wreck in 55, 56, 7 or somewhere. Before they ever had the NFR, Eddie Ackridge beat him for the bareback riding title, and it was under $100. It was like $18, $20. I can't say sure, but I know it was under $100. And that's back when Cow Palace was over. Whoever had the most money was the world champion. But he come back in bareback riding after that, and then after that he was pretty much done, wasn't he, Melvin?
yeah, he ended up and the bottle got to him. He got to drinking it. Like one year he went to Fort Worth, and didn't even have his spurs on. He got on a bareback horse and didn't have no spurs or nothing on. He just, but he was out of it, But he could still compete, though. I mean, that was the thing of it is he could be drunker and all get out and they'd beat you.
Yeah.
And,
Sounds like that Junior Vaughn out of New Mexico. They said that he came back, was going to win the Madison Square Garden out there in New York City, and got him drunk, and they hid his boots from him. And he showed up and roped his last calf barefooted and won it.
yes, I remember him.
Do you ever get to go to Madison Square Garden?
No.
Nope.
I would have, could have went the year I joined the association. And matter of fact, I entered Coffeyville there, and that's back when they had Coffeyville was over Labor Day and that way. And I had Paul Long had the stock, and I rode 2 of his best bulls he had, and they let me win. I think they let me win split a third or fourth in the average. And Buck come to me and he said, "Hey kid," said, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to the back New York and Boston. I'll take you and pay all your expenses for half of what you win." And I said, "Buck, I'm not even out of school yet. I got to go to school. I'm still high school, you know." And I never did go with, which is a good thing, because if I'd went back there with him, young as I was, why?
They never got back home.
Well, I probably wouldn't. He'd have cow-killed me.
Paul Long, was he related to Delane Long, I guess? Were they related?
Boy, I don't know. That'd been before my time.
Just seems like they might be stock contractors from that
I mean,
area.
I'd have been a little kid. I don't remember Paul Long. He could have been. I don't know.
Yeah, well, you know, as a matter of fact, I think that would have been in '54.
Yeah.
I think, and I think that was the last rodeo one of the last rodeos that Long put on. I mean, that year. I think he quit right after that, and but at that time he was good stock producer, and that's the only reason of course. I entered it, I just a hometown guy, and I entered it. The rodeo out there, I didn't have a card or anything, you know, but I could.
You used to be able to do that, designate hometown entry at a pro rodeo without having a pro card.
You could enter as many as you wanted, as long as you lived in like 50-mile radius or something.
Yeah, hometown entries.
Yeah.
And I said, and Buck, I was just glad to get. I got some money. When enough to pay me its fees, I just tickled to death. And then Buck come up and says, "Kid, you rode the 2 best bulls you had, and they let you win a split third." Of course, that's back then. You had to do something to be. Them judges wouldn't mark you if you were just a young kid. You didn't get too good a marking 9 times out of 10. And they had to know who you was. And I said, it's like one year I split Anita in the bull riding with Willie Thomas. He was a colored man, and them judges. The only reason they let me split because they didn't want him to win it all, so they let him and I split. He's the only 2 that got 2 bulls rode. That was when Coburn was putting it on. Coburn put it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, my grandfather, when he broke out in the 30s, he could ride broncs and started out as a bronc rider. And he said, if you wasn't kind of one of the old guys, you couldn't get a score.
They wouldn't let you win nothing.
Made him mad, and he said, heck with you, I'm going to take my chances with a stopwatch.
Yep.
You had to know somebody or something to get there, you know.
Yep.
And I don't know, maybe because I traveled with Buck the first few rodeos I went to. I was hauling with him. Maybe that kind of gave me a break because they know Buck, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but you know, later on, while I got to, it didn't help me much because I couldn't win nothing, you know. And it wasn't because I didn't mark me. I just couldn't ride that. I couldn't get the whistle on nothing.
Yeah.
And that's that's the reason I started rocking the barrel, because I had to have something to pay me entry fees.
Right.
I got a question for Melvin. Melvin, in '67, was you at Oklahoma City the night Freckles Brown rode Tornado?
Yes.
Tell us about that, because I've heard 40,000 people witnessed, and that building only holds like 10,000 people.
Well, I don't think Tornado didn't have probably his best day.
Best day.
But it was still.
It's still Tornado, though.
It was Tornado. That was the thing it was. It's kind of like.
Sound like the time Buster Douglas beat old Mike Tyson. Still beat Mike Tyson, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was that was a fact. You know, it's kind of like, well, you're talking about Tornado. You know, back when Speck, you know, old Speck they had, and he went, and they finally they got him. They rode him, but it was after he got hurt. The bull had got hurt. It was at Burwell, Nebraska, and he was bad about hooking other bulls and stuff, and they hooked him. And everybody told him not to put him in a draw. Well, he went out there. And Ronnie Rawson had him drawed, and he went out there and he started to turn back, and he just went to bawling, kind of kicking at his belly, and out there they let him win the bull ride because that was the first time he had been rode in about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And which he was ranked. I got him 3 times, and I couldn't get out of the gate on him. It was.
What was the atmosphere like when Freckles rode Tornado down there? Did the crowd just go crazy?
Oh yeah. I mean, because that's his home. He was at Lawton. He lived at Lawton, so
Yeah,
I mean that's his hometown. I mean, basically home state, and and it was they just like to raise the roof on it. It was.
Somebody said that gave that bull ride credit for making the finals down there at Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Said the crowds were kind of so before that, and that's
Yeah,
when
it
it
was.
really turned around.
Yeah.
And it did, and that was supposed to see. They had to Oklahoma City is after they had been to Dallas, Los Angeles, and then back to Oklahoma City is where it was at. So finals had been going on for.
What about a rematch between Freckles and Tornado?
I don't know. I don't.
The next year, did he draw him somewhere, or did they just
Well,
have
I
a
thought
deal?
they had an exhibition or something.
Something
Is in Miami, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And that's all we know.
is Miami. I knew I guess probably Jim Shoulders put the deal up or something.
I don't know.
And I never did hear the history. Did he write him again?
Yeah, they said he
probably
rode him.
rode
They
him.
said something like the Lions Club or local Elks or something like that put all the money up to match Freckles against Tornado again.
Yeah.
And we just heard about this just the other day, and we've actually had quite a few calls on it. One guy said it was before the finals, and then another guy called and said it was after the finals. So we need to go back to the old
I'm pretty sure it
newspapers.
was the summer after he had rode him at December.
That would make the sense, Give Tornado a rematch against Freckles,
Right.
and but they said he rode him the second time too.
Yeah, yeah. And like Melvin said, I'm not taking anything against the bull. He was ranked, but he was getting up there in years when Freckles did ride him the first time.
I think somebody else rode him at the finals after that.
That same year.
Yeah, the same
and
year.
later on in the round, but I can't remember who that was.
Nobody remembers the second guy's name.
No.
hardly.
That's the way it is.
The guy we were talking to remembered his name the other day.
Yeah.
I forgot. Gosh dang it.
Yeah.
Poor fella.
Yeah.
He would have been the most famous.
He might
bull
have
rider.
made a better ride than Freckles, and nobody can't even remember his name.
Well, that goes back because one year at Houston, Freckles and I drawed the same bulls, just reversed them. We got two bulls,
Switched him.
and we just switched them. Freckles win it all. I don't win a dime.
Yeah.
I didn't get a paycheck,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it was. I said that was ironic that we both had the same bull, but just switched, And of course, I asked the judges. Of course, that was Freckles that's when he had a good name. I mean,
sure.
Freckles Brown was it, And I jumped the judges about him. I said, didn't have as good a day with you. Well,
Yeah.
Whatever,
Felt pretty good day to you, didn't it,
Yeah.
when he was throwing you around?
Well, I said, he wasn't. I didn't think he was ranked, but I mean, they was a good bucking bull.
Right.
But they just wouldn't,
Yeah.
they just would like Houston, big rodeo, and I think at that time they still had like 18 performances. I
Yeah.
think.
I think that still goes on a little today. I mean, they wouldn't admit it, but it's hard not to have that in the back of your head.
yeah,
you know?
Oh yeah, the announcer. They
build
This is
him
the
up.
world champion.
Yeah.
Nah. He's so great. And then some other guys. Here's old Jim from Newcastle,
Mispronounce-
Oklahoma.
Mispronounce his name.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when he's getting everybody fired up, it's
Right.
he's got to be getting. They got to be getting the judges a little bit fired.
crowd-
What about it, John? You're a professional judge here.
Well, I know when I was young going to them pro rodeos, Marvin Paul Shoulders was a big thing on the screen. And every time they'd announce him, they'd say, "This is the son of Jim Shoulders." And then later on, they'd say his name, Marvin Paul Shoulders. They never did announce him at first until later on,
Yeah.
But that's how it was. Them big famous guys, they built them up, and it got, the judges back then, and everything. And
Well, it's just human nature.
Yeah. just
You
nature.
can't help it.
Yeah.
They're getting excited. You got to naturally get a little bit excited, I would
Yeah.
think, but maybe not. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Good thing I'm not a judge, Jimbo.
Yeah, me too.
I've been getting excited giving people the wrong scores.
I got a question for Jimbo. Was Freckles Brown the only man that won a world title that never competed at the NFR that 1 year he broke his neck?
That's the only man. And Ann Lewis.
Oh, yeah, Ann Lewis got killed in a car wreck.
Did
Yeah.
the same thing. But as far as I know, they're the only two that's ever done it.
Yeah.
John, I got a question for you. Here a couple weeks ago, one of the only rodeo questions I've ever stumped Jimbo on, and it wasn't necessarily a question, but you know about this guy. Know what a slim over there. He's on the sign going in. What about know what a slim? Jimbo had no information on.
He was before my time, but he was a bareback rider. I can't remember what else he done, but he was right there, lived right south of Lenapah, and he was one of the first guys on the table or on the board. I think, what's that sign say? Is 30s or 40s when he was a champion?
Maybe before that.
Maybe.
This sounds
Maybe
just
could have
like
been
what Jimbo was saying the other day.
It could have been in the 20s along with Fred Larry and him. Yeah. But all I remember that he was a rough stock rider. Do you remember anything about him, Melvin?
No, just outside of hearsay, but I didn't hear a lot.
Richardson was his last name, wasn't it?
Yeah, know what a Slim Richardson. Yep.
Yeah, I knew his last name, Cody. You don't say I didn't know nothing about
Well, no. I was just trying to get more information. You and John's about the same on that. Know what a slim information.
Right.
He even went to describing the sign he's on instead of describing what he did. So,
right.
hey, and I was going to ask you about another guy real quick, John, while we're talking. Gene Wink.
Oh,
kind
man.
of a mutual acquaintance of both of ours, a good friend of yours, I know, and he was a good friend of my granddad's.
Yeah.
But tell us about that guy.
Oh, he was a character. Gene, one time he could rope kids and had a really, really good black horse, and a lot of them guys rode him at big rodeos and really good live. But Gene had a extracurricular deal that he liked robbing banks.
Just a little sideline job.
Side job, yep. And down at Tulsa, when they sentenced him to federal court there, and they finally caught him on a few little gigs and sentenced him to 99. Gene told me, said he stood up and wiped his forehead and said, "Phew, I thought you was going to give me life for a minute." And he went into prison. He's in prison down at Oklahoma City at McAllister. And while he was in there, he trained barrel horses for Ray Page's daughter. Was her name Kim? Or I can't for sure. But he trained barrel horses. And the McAllister prison brand would come and play at Lenapah Rodeo. And Gene would come and bring that girl and her barrel horse, and she'd run barrels at Lenapah. And he trained her some nice barrel horses and stuff. Well, when they had the riot down there, I believe it was 72 or 73, the warden went to Gene to ask him if he could do anything. And I believe it was Governor Hall was the governor. And he said, if I'll pardon my parole. And he told me it took him like 3 days that he got the riot stopped and they pardoned his parole. And then he was fun. He could tell rodeo stories. He could tell bank stories, and he was quite a guy.
He was like a safecracker, wasn't he?
Yeah. A lot of them, they do it at night. Nobody,
Right.
They didn't. Actually, he told me he never armed robbed a bank.
Right.
There's always, he could crack them safes and stuff. And I believe I'm not 100%, but I believe he was working for Barnesville Police Department. They sent him to that, how to crack them safes and unlock them state deals and everything. He found out it was a lot easier to do it on his side time than it was to.
Right.
He just found him a side gig.
Yeah.
Little day work here and there.
Side hustle.
Yeah, that's what they call it now, isn't it, Jimbo? Side hustles.
Yeah. And he played a lot. He talked about your grandpa. He played cards with your grandpa a lot. He liked to play cards too.
Yeah, right up until these guys were getting pretty old in age, and my grandpa'd go up there, they'd load up, and they'd go gambling across the nation, or playing cards or dominoes. I think they played a lot of dominoes together later life. And they'd go to the world champion domino tournament in Andalusia, Alabama together. But they were great friends and possibly partners in crime. Who knows?
Funny story about Gene Wing. I don't know the city. If you ever get Lon Chaney here, he can tell it.
We're trying to get him here. Get over here, Lon.
That good black horse is all over and is all riding him, Missouri. And a bunch of cops showed up, and Gene was sitting back there, and he told Lon, he said, "I'm going to run my calf." and I'm not going to rope him. I'm going to run him to the back end of the arena. I said, you just be sure and get my horse and get him home. I'll see you in a few days. He nods his head and runs that calf to the back end, and they said he stepped off like he's going to tie him, and over the fence he went. And Lon, he went ahead and roped. He might have placed, I'm not for sure. And he said it was 4 or 5 days of the week. Gene showed back up around Copan.
That's a good one.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, some guys like that.
Oh, yeah.
They're not making guys like that
No,
anymore.
I'm glad we're
Jimbo.
getting it on tape.
Yeah, they're not making people like that anymore. It don't seem like.
But that guy, he was, man, he would, and later in life, he'd do anything for you too. You know, I borrowed money when I was rodeoing off of him, and he'd always loan you money. He'd count it out in $100 bills.
Was it his money?
I don't know. He just pulled out his
Hold
billfold.
on, let me go dig a hole in the backyard.
And he'd count out $400 or $500 bills wherever you wanted, and he'd say, "Now I want it back in the same dimension. Don't be bringing me 20 here and there." He said,
Yeah.
"You either just wait till you work and give me it all back at one time," and that's how he was. And if you paid him back, he's good to loan it again when you needed it.
There were a lot of good old gamblers like that back in the day that cowboy was down on his luck. They didn't even have to be rodeo guys, but
Yeah.
they'd loan a cowboy a little bit of money and then you just paid them back and they'd do it again.
Yep.
And most of them didn't want nothing for it. Didn't want anything unless they paid your fees for half.
Yeah. I drove him to a few of them Calcuttas later in his life when he couldn't see at night, and boy, he loved to play them now. He'd study them guys, and he was just made gambler, I guess.
Yep, he was a real character. The other day I was in the gas station here and met a fella. It's a few years ago, seems like the other day. And his name was Gene Wing, and I said, "Holy moly." I know your grandpa. He said, "How do you know my grandpa?" I said, "His name was Gene Wing too, wasn't it?" And he pulled his arm up, and he has a great big tattoo of a safe on his arm. This kid right here in town.
That's something, now.
And I said, "Yeah, our grandpas knew each other pretty good."
Yeah,
But yeah, he works at a body shop here in town or something.
yeah.
Small world out there.
Small world.
Yep.
Yep.
Pretty darn small world. Well, Jimbo, what else you got for Marvin today?
Oh, I don't know. Just appreciate him coming over and sharing his little stories with us. Great stories, him and John both.
I know. Did you ever get to hang out with Casey Tibbs any?
I know I rodeoed with him when he was still rodeoing when I rodeoed, but I didn't. I was younger. I'm down here and he's up here, so I didn't.
What was it like when he walked into a rodeo grounds?
Well, he was
like Elvis walking into a concert, I'm sure.
He was flashy. I mean, that was because he always purple shirts. I mean, he was always, and he was he was. I guess I could call him attractive man. I don't know, but he dang sure could ride broncs. I mean, that was the thing of it is, and he was. And the story goes, I don't know that for sure, but the saddle he used had a broken tree in it. And if he had to go buy another saddle, he'd take a car and run over it and break the tree, and then it would fit him. I mean,
I heard judges would actually check for broken trees, and some of them old bronc riders would have like a metal bar they'd put down in their saddle where that tree, and they would feel it and it'd feel like it was solid. What advantages a broken tree give you? Because I have heard that, and I heard judges do check saddle bronc riders' trees
Right,
all the
yeah.
time now.
I don't know whether it'd give them more flex and wouldn't kick them up out of there. I don't know what advantage you could. You'd think it'd hurt a horse's back maybe take a power away from a horse like when you rope with a broken tree.
Yeah, I don't know. They can feel the slightest. I know a roping horse can feel the slightest little anything in that tree.
And they'll give it up.
Well, I had a horse that would go ahead and work one time, but he wouldn't let you back on him if there was something wrong with the tree and the saddle.
Yeah.
Which was real tough after you got a steer tied down, John. Yeah. And sitting on the end of the rope and your horse won't let you back on him.
Yeah.
You need to get back on him because you ain't got him tied enough, and you need to win some money. Yep. You got to put some slack in that rope. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, it's I don't know. Like Casey, I was at a few rodeos. He was about to retire when I cracked out. Anyhow, he wasn't going to a lot of rodeos. I mean, he was still tough, but he was there. But and then when I first cracked out, I rodeoed in the Midwest, basically Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, Nebraska, and that's about it. I didn't travel a long way. But Casey was he was. One year we was when they had the finals at Oklahoma City. Why, he come up there and I know he thought I was somebody else because he come up there and I was sitting in the restaurant and he asked me, and then he looked down and see, well, no, you're not him. And then he laughed. But he was a classy, and he, of course, he had the car. He always had a Cadillac. What I understand, that's about what he drove, is a convertible. And but the women, they kind of liked him. It's kind of like Buck Rutherford and Todd Wadley. Them guys, they was women people.
I think there was always competition between Buck and Casey Tibbs. They always liked women. Same ones kind of liked them too.
Yeah.
There's kind of a contest.
He was probably the first big rock star in rodeo, maybe.
Oh, I bet he was the flamboyant. Some of them deals call him the flamboyant boy. You know,
he's on the cover of Life magazine.
Yeah.
You've got the magazine, don't you?
That's a great cover. I love that cover. It's just historic.
Purple shirts and flashy champs, and he always, like Melvin said, he drove a purple Cadillac, or he'd either drive a purple one or a yellow one.
I was watching old black and white Western the other day, Tales of Wells Fargo, and he was on that.
He was on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in quite a few different movies. We got some of the stuff from his Wild West show in Japan here. I guess he left everyone stranded in Japan, couldn't pay them. They had to get a home on their own.
I don't think he ever made any money, or if he did, when he did, he lost it. You know?
Oh, yeah. I think he was broke when he died.
They said he was the only guy they knew that could walk into Fort Knox with a gunny sack and come out missing his billfold.
It was in probably the 60s. And I have no idea why. It might have been final in Oklahoma City. He come by Schultz one time, and I was up there, and he was there. I was just a big old kid. Mm-hmm. But there was all kinds of people hung out there.
Oh, and him and Schultz, there's a lot of stories about him and Schultz and traveling and running over a hitchhiker and just all sorts of stuff.
But, I remember him being there, and it probably was in the wintertime. I was pretty little, but he was around there for a couple of days. My dad and Sheldon went to school together, so we was pretty tight, and we got to go up there and meet him. He wouldn't have known who I was or nothing because I was just a big old kid, you know.
Big old kid.
Or a little old kid.
Little old kid.
Still a little old kid.
Well, you going to ask him the question, Jimbo?
Or a Mount Rushmore question?
Oh, yeah.
What do you think we ought to ask it on? Clowns?
Yeah.
If you'd making a Mount Rushmore of clowns, who would you put on it? Need 4 names. Who would you?
Four names.
Yeah.
Oh, Cajun Kid, Wick Path, Jerry Olson. And these is probably guys, the reason I'm naming them, is the ones that I was working with.
Mm-hmm.
And Buck LeGrand would be the one you could put on there.
Yep.
And I said he would be, and actually I worked, and I know there's a lot of clowns out there but I didn't have a chance to work with them.
Right.
Did you ever work with Quail?
No, I never did really work with Quail, but Quail was down there, and I talked to him. Well, he come to one of the clown reunions, and Quail, which was one of the few that he ever come to, and he come up to me and was telling me about, because I used to, when I was working the barrel, while I'd run and spin around it and drop into the barrel. And he said at Big Springs that year, he was there. That's before he was clowning, but he said, I seen you do that. And he said, I copied that, and I done that. Oh, that's what he started doing that. Mm-hmm. As Quail, you know. And matter of fact, but, you know, I worked clown Lenapah one year that he was there, and he had to go. He had Springdale, and he had to leave the day before, and I clowned the last performance.
Yeah.
At Springdale, or Lenapah.
Yeah.
He's sure one of my heroes, old Quail Dobbs.
Yeah.
Quail was a funny man. I mean, he was just funny just to be around him, you know. And he kind of reminded me of John Lindsay. John Lindsay was a funny man, and it was.
There was another guy, Ted Kimsey, growing up.
Yeah.
He was a funny man.
Yep.
Yeah.
But if you went and jacked with him as a kid, when the rodeo wasn't going on out by his trailer, he'd run you off. He's a grouchy, funny man.
Well, I think that kind of comes with the territory. I think it's if you're especially if you get up and you got yourself a name, boy. Now, if you were younger, you probably wouldn't do it, but when they got a name, well, then they get a little bit grumpy.
Cody probably just brought the grumpy out in him.
Yeah, I just brought the worst out in him, I'm sure.
He was probably over messing with his axe or his makeup
you know
or
he's
something.
doing something.
You need me to mess with that monkey you have in there?
I can see Cody doing that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, man, this has been a good one, Jimbo.
Really good one.
Holy moly. So many great stories. So many great stories
Oh, yeah,
today.
for sure.
Well, we sure appreciate you fellers coming in.
Thank you for asking us.
Yeah, sure appreciate you asking us over.
This is one of my favorite podcasts yet, Jimbo.
I think so.
Holy moly.
I think so.
Some of the greatest rodeo stories ever told was today.
Yep. Most of them true.
John might have been making some of them up, but
Well,
I'm just
that's kind of, you're talking about making stuff up when I started going to my old time, going to that old time Cowboys, reunion and stuff. And Wayne Carney said, well, he said, it don't make no difference. He said, you can tell, you can sit there and lie. Or he said, nobody can remember back anyhow whether you're telling the truth or not. He said, I said, well, that's probably true,
Well, all right, everybody. This has been a great edition of the Cowboys of the Osage podcast. Be sure and buy Jimbo's CD. He's got 2 songs on a major CD out right now. If you still have a CD player, my new truck don't even have a CD player, so I can't listen to it.
They'll play on a DVD player in your car.
It'll play on the DVD player too.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're going to get it on Apple or Spotify or something soon enough.
Yeah.
And be sure and like us, share everything, and we'll see y'all next week.
Thanks.
Old stories like long lost friends, rodeos and late night bends, history before our time, round pens and pasture rides, cowboys of the Osage.